So we have created city controller and added a get method to fetch the list of cities in our previous video. In this video, we will learn how to make a method asynchronous, and then we will understand different types of HTTP verbs, and we will also implement add and delete operation to our city controller. Let's start with making our method asynchronous. So this is our city method, and even though it serves our purpose, but the code return is not efficient because it is not synchronous code. Meaning if our user call this method on our API, the process gets blocked until it returns a response to our application. There can be hundreds of such dropdown available on any complicated multi-tab form, and the value of those dropdowns may be filled with different API methods. In that case, if our code is not asynchronous, each activity will block on every method before moving on to the next method. For example, if we have created a program to make a breakfast, and if our code is not asynchronous, each activity here will take some time and every method will wait before moving on to the next method. In that case, user have to wait a lot to get his breakfast ready, and who has so much time to keep waiting. In synchronous code, actually we are not using full capability of the processor, and these concerns are important for the program you write today. You can avoid such performance bottleneck and enhance the overall responsiveness of your application by using asynchronous programming. Because using asynchronous code, we would be able to run different independent processes in parallel, and the same work can be finished faster. This example picture I have shown here is taken from Microsoft website, and if you would like to understand this example in more depth, I have given the link in the description. So traditional techniques for writing asynchronous code application was very complicated to write, but C#5 introduced a simplified approach to work with async programming, and compiler does the difficult work that the developer used to do in the past. So as a result, you will get all the advantages of asynchronous programming with a fraction of efforts. So if we want to make this method asynchronous, we just need to make few changes in this code. Let's make those changes next. We need to add async modifier to make any method asynchronous. Your method should return task. If method has no return statement, we can use this non-generic task. And if it has a return statement, we can use this generic type, and we can pass the return type in angle brackets. So as soon as we mark a method async, our method will start to give this warning, and it says this method lacks await operator and will run synchronously. So async and await goes hand in hand. If we will not use await, our method will not work asynchronously. Async method should have at least one await operator to make our method asynchronous. So we can place await here, and when we are using await, we also need to call async version of this toList method. That's it. Now our API method is asynchronous. Let's test it if API is still returning response correctly or not. Getting this error page because it takes some time to compile the application when we make any changes in the file. Refresh it. So nothing has broken. Our API is returning response correctly, and also this dropdown is getting populated correctly in the Angular app. So you can see how Microsoft has made it very easy to make a method asynchronous with very little efforts. Benefits are huge on the performance and scalability side. So we will use this approach only in our upcoming methods. Next we will see what are the different kinds of HTTP verbs we will frequently use in our web API for different CRUD operations. So we have seen how to use HTTP GET method to fetch the data from database. There are 4 basic HTTP verbs we frequently use in request to interact with the resources in REST API. Get is used to retrieve a specific resource or a collection of resources, and that we already have used to fetch the list of cities from database. Post is used to create a new resource. We'll see how we can use post to add new cities. And delete, as its name suggests, is used to delete a specific resource. And put is used to update any existing resources. So we will cover post and delete in this video. Let's see how to add a new city in the database next. Let's name this method add city. City model has an ID and name. ID is the primary key and it automatically generated in database. This name should be something that our API user should be able to post in our addCity method. Change this HTTP verb to post and add an input parameter on this method of type string. Let's name it city name. As we need to post city, add a variable of type city and instantiate with new city. Set this city equals city name that we are receiving as an input of this method. And using data context, we can access the city DB set, and it provides a method called add async to add a new entity to the database. And we'll pass the city as parameter here. This DB set will not be saved in our database until we will call save changes on the associated DB context. So we need to call the save changes method of data context to save these changes in the database. And once the changes are saved, we will return OK status and return the city in response back to the API method caller. It may also happen that because of some issues at database level, our changes are not saved, but I'm not using any exception handling code for now. We will see how to handle exception in upcoming section. For now, let's take the positive test cases and learn the basic first. Although we can use the same endpoint with post method, and API automatically call this method on the base of HTTP verb, but let's use add as well here in HTTP post method. So our API endpoint will look like this, and we can pass the city name parameter using a query string. For example, if we need to add Miami as new city, we can pass it like this. So our method is ready. Let's see how to test it. You have seen that we have tested get method in browser because by default when we run any URL on the browser, it sends a get request on that URL. But this is a post method and we will have to use postman to test this API method. Let's see how to use postman to send a post request on our API. Hope you already have installed postman. So open a postman. So if we use the get method here and try to access the city endpoint, you can see our getCity method is called, and here we can see the response of our API. Let's use this URL to call the addCity method on API. And we need to change HTTP verb to post to call our post method. Click on send button to send the request on WebAPI. Our method has returned 200 OK status. That means a request was successful. And this new city should be added in database. Let's verify the same if it is added in the database. You can use SQL Server Management Studio if you already have installed it on your system. You can use this SQL statement to browse the data of a table. So new city has been added. We are using SQL Server Management Studio for browsing this query, but it is also possible you have not installed SQL Server Management Studio, as I have marked it as optional one in the installation setup video. But no worry, if you have not installed a Management Studio, we can run all database queries in VS Code only using this extension we have installed previously. Let's see how to use this extension to browse the table data. Click on this add connection and provide the SQL Server instance name here. If the database is available locally, you can use a local host, or you can simply use .here. Provide database name. If you are on Windows operating system, you can use integrated security. Otherwise, you will have to provide SQL login and password to connect to the database. I am using Windows, so selecting integrated will work for me. This is an optional one. Here you can provide the display name for this instance name. I am leaving it blank. So our database table and other folders are appearing here. And if we need to browse the city table, we can use this table folder. And here you can get the list of tables. Right click on the table and use this select top 1000. And here we will get the query window and result will appear here of this particular query. You can run any SQL statement here that you can run using SQL Server Management Studio. Let's close all these windows and see what other methods we can use to post the data on any API endpoint next. So this is one way of passing a parameter to our API method. Suppose we want to submit a value like this instead of using a query string. In that case, we can add placeholder using curly braces, and we can provide the input parameter name here, and the name of input parameter should match with this one, otherwise it will not work. This parameter is not case sensitive, but spelling should match here. Let's try this in Postman. So we get 200 status code and also got the newly added city as response from our API. Let's check if it is added in database. Yep, it is added. So these two different ways to post the data is okay if we have to send one or two parameters in API. But in case if we need to submit a form, for example this new property form where a lot of data fields exist, this approach will not work. In that case, you should have an option to get the data as JSON object that we can submit from our Angular app here in the input parameter. Let's see how we can do that next. So add a new endpoint and name it post. Let's comment this line so that you can refer to older code as well if needed. Here we will replace this string with city type and name it city. Comment this line as we are now getting the city object directly in the input parameter and it is not needed here. Let me test it in Postman. So if we run this post endpoint without submitting any value, we'll get this error that says unsupported media type. We can post JSON data in our API using Postman using this body tab and select JSON type here. Hope you already know how to define JSON data. We have done this a lot in our Angular sessions. We need to put curly braces and then we can pass fields as key and pair like this. It is quite possible that there are many fields that we need to submit in API, and if we want to save our time, we can just fetch the data of that object if any API method is available. For example, our city endpoint already returned a city type object in JSON format. We can run that API endpoint here in Postman. We can copy all the fields that we get in response, and then we can change the data here in body as per our requirement. As ID is an auto-generated field, we should not post it in JSON. Let's add Texas in city name. I think this is not a city but a state. Anyway, let's press the send button. Perfect. Request method successfully executed. Let's check if new entry is available in the database. Yep, it is saved. Let's see what will happen if we pass ID as well in JSON data. It was not successful. We get 500 internal server error and got this error message as a response that is returned by SQL Server to our API. We will handle all these kinds of error in upcoming videos. Let me add this method as a separate method so that you can use both kind of ways to post the data to this API method. So now we have both the methods. One is accepting city type as parameter and another one is accepting string as type. So we have seen how to use different ways to post the data to our API method. Let's see how to delete an entry from the database. For example, we have inserted state here in the city list. Let's implement the delete method next to delete the wrong entries. Let me copy this add city method. Sorry, I am a little lazy in typing and I use copy and paste a lot. Let's name it delete city. And as a parameter, let's use ID, that is a city ID in a table. And on the base of this ID, we will delete the data from table. We can use delete/id as a placeholder to pass the ID in input parameter of our delete city method. And we'll fetch the city on the base of ID in a where. Where is a type that was introduced in C#3 to assign a type automatically on the base of value we are assigning to it. Although it is dynamically being assigned, but still it is a strongly typed object. just like this, as we define a specific type like this. Now we can use data context dot cities dot find async method and pass the id as parameter here to fetch the city on the base of id from database. And then we can use the remove method, but seems there is no async version of this method. Let's use this method remove. So we will have to remove this await as well, as this is not an async method, and this city is already being passed here as an entity, and this save changes method will remove the given entity from the database. Let's return the id as response of this method. So our method is ready. Let's test the same in postman. Our endpoint URL for this is delete slash, we need to pass id here. Let's remove this Texas as it is not a city. Got an error, method is not allowed because we have passed post method. Yep, this time request is successful. We got 200 status code. Verify the database, and yes, it is removed from the database as well. So we have learned how to make a method async and also learned to implement add and delete operation in API using entity framework. We have used these entity framework methods here in controller to run various CRUD operation, but this is not a good approach. Controller should never be tightly bound with any specific data access framework. For example, our controller is tightly bound with entity framework, and if in future suppose we want our application to use any other framework, we have to rewrite all these methods. So to resolve this problem, we should use repository pattern, and in the next video we will learn what is repository pattern and how to use the same in our web API. So see you in next video. Stay tuned. Bye bye.